Try to find a seat. That'd be great. Let's do the happy news first. Sarah and Gerald Carr here with an extra bundle with her, and we're happy to see them again. Now for the sad news. Today is either the very next or the very last Sunday for a couple of our folks who we will miss dearly, Helen and Joey Greer. I hope you guys do well, travel safe, and know that we love you and find a great home church that will be blessed by your service. And then Rena Garraway is off to protect the Israeli military, and you leave sometime this week, right? 2 weeks, but so we're going to miss Rena, and the family gets to come back one more stint at least, and it's going to be a sad day, but we'll be praying for you, honey, for safety, and tell your brother I said hi when you're at military parties. And Chris and Naomi Parrish, they've got a couple weeks with us left, but as long as we're doing this, I thought I would know that. They're off to the north. They're off to Alaska. Both took teaching jobs in Alaska, and so they'll be with us just another week or two. But make sure you greet these people and tell them how great it's been to have them as part of our family at Ogden Valley Community Church. Last announcement, and this one's great news. We have a very brief, and I mean probably 4 to 6 minute meeting for basically the second row, the pretty ladies in the second row. Anyone who's going to help Pulse, the Pulse worship team, the teenage worship team on the last Sunday of June, we're going to have a handout music and get a plan meeting today before the picnic. You won't miss a thing, I promise. And if you'd stay just in your seats, a bunch of them came in today and says, I forgot my instrument. I said, it's okay. I knew they would. So we're just going to have a brief meeting, make sure everyone has music, and we'll talk about rehearsals. Yes, you should come. So turn in your Bibles, please, to 2 Samuel. We also have some folks who I do not know here. I will not embarrass you. That is not how we do things here. But welcome. We're Ogden Valley Community Church, and it is our privilege to walk through books of the Bible. We don't skip passages, although I think about it from time to time. And we have found our way through 2 Samuel, and we come to the part of a paralyzed leader. I believe both 1 and 2 Samuel is about leadership, and here's another piece of that. And so if you want to find your Bibles and find 2 Samuel 14, it's in the first third of your Bible, and you'll be okay. But welcome. If you're a guest today, welcome. Okay, you blew it. You blew it. I blew it. It happens. Somewhere in your story, you've made a choice. Typically, it's a series of choices, but you made a choice. Turns out it was a disastrous choice, and you've made a mess of things. And now every day you live with the painful consequences and reminders of that choice. If you could, you would do anything to go back and change it and make a different choice. But you can't change it. You used to live your life with a sense of mission and purpose. You knew why God had placed you on this earth and placed you in the community of faith that you find yourself in. And you were just going to be part of a team that was going to help change the world for God, or at least certainly build His kingdom here. Now, not so much. You've blown it. You blew it. And so you just kind of roll over. You're in coast mode. You've convinced yourself that if God wants you on the team at all, it's certainly the B team or the C team. When I was a youth pastor, we always had an ultimate Frisbee set of teams. And the shirt you wanted to wear was the orange shirt. They know. Because for a couple years, they didn't wear the orange shirt. They wore the red shirts. But thank goodness you didn't get the green shirts. And so there was a hierarchy of ultimate Frisbee teams. And you somehow think that God's team has a hierarchy, where if you're not on the A team anymore, why bother? So if you've convinced yourself that that's the case, you're just going to live your life that way. Kind of a B team Christian or a C team believer. That's what we want to talk about today in 2 Samuel 14, because this happened. I doubt it was ultimate Frisbee, but this happened in the Bible. The kingdom is in jeopardy. David's got a mess on his hands. David's oldest son, Amnon, was the crown prince, the heir of the throne. But now he's dead, put to death by his brother Absalom, who is now the crown prince and heir to the throne. But he's banished and about 90 miles away from Jerusalem, living with relatives on his mom's side of the family. David seems genuinely paralyzed and is doing nothing about it. Verse 1 says this. And I'm reading out of the NASB today. I know many of you hold ESV or New King James or King James or King George. I don't know what Bibles you hold, but just so you know what I'm reading from so you get a handle. Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was inclined toward Absalom. So Joab sent to Tekoa and brought a wise woman from there and said to her, "Please pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments now, and do not anoint yourself with oil, but be like a woman who has been mourning for the dead many days. Then go to the king and speak to him in this manner." So Joab put the words in her mouth, ending in verse 3. So Joab becomes the key player in the story again. His motives seem unclear, but at least he's probably genuinely concerned about the kingdom. Whatever his concerns are, maybe he sees Absalom as still being the best heir to the throne after David, as he needs a successor. Probably David's other sons don't measure up quite as much, so he wants Absalom back, and he wants Absalom reconciled with his father David. Perhaps he fears that Absalom could lead a rebellion from a distance, and it's safer, keep your enemies close, kind of a thing. So he wants Absalom near. The text doesn't really tell us other than he's generally concerned. In the last paragraph of chapter 13, it was really hard to tell in the original language of Hebrew in this particular sense whether David was prone to pursue Absalom and put him to death for murdering his brother, or he was pursuing Absalom to reconcile him and bring him back. The first paragraph of chapter 14 is equally vague in the Hebrew language. It says the king's heart was inclined toward Absalom. And the Hebrew could be translated against or in favor of, toward Absalom. Goes either way. So what we know for certain is David the king, and he needs to do something. We read through the text, it's obvious Joab has brought this to the king's attention time and time again. But the king seems paralyzed because of his sin with Bathsheba. So now, he's just unwilling to act. And so Joab, commander of the army, has a plan. And he recruits this woman from a small village, probably a theater troupe or something, I don't know, but about 10 miles south of Jerusalem, up in the hills of Judea. And the text describes her as a wise woman. Well, don't get too excited, because that's the exact same Hebrew word as was used to describe Jonadab. You all remember him in the previous chapter. See why you got to come every week? It carries the idea of being shrewd, kind of politically savvy. That's the word wise in this context. What he needs is a woman with a little chutzpah, if you will, and a lot of savvy to fulfill this role, to convince King David to act. Verse 4 starts this way. Now when the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and prostrated herself and said, "Help, O king!" And the king said to her, "What is your trouble?" And she answered, "Truly," not a true statement, "truly, I am a widow, for my husband is dead. Your maidservant had 2 sons, but the 2 of them struggled together in the field, and there was no one to separate them. So one struck the other and killed him. Now behold, the whole family has risen against your maidservant, and they say, 'Hand over the one who struck his brother, that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed, and destroy the heir also.' Thus they extinguish my coal which is left, so as to leave my husband neither name nor remnant on the face of the earth." So this lady from Tekoa appears to David, King David, and appears to be in mourning, just like the commander of the army, Joab, told her. She's supposedly a widow. Her husband supposedly is dead. Supposedly she has 2 sons. 2 boys are out in the field, got in a fight. One of them killed the other. Much like the Cain and Abel story, David might be thinking. Now the clan has risen up and they want the remaining son put to death for what he's done. And under the law, murder was a capital offense, punishable by death, and they want him punished. But she says They want him to be put to death to eliminate the last living heir. And she's saying they have mixed motives because they want him punished and out of the way so that they would receive her inheritance, or really the inheritance of her husband. And it would end her husband's legacy and story. She describes it as a burning coal or a burning ember, the glowing ember going out. And if David doesn't do something, this will go out forever. Remember the last time David was told a story and he got all worked up? Okay. If you don't, you just got to come more often. Verse 8 says this, Then the king said to the woman, Go to your house and I'll give you orders concerning you. The woman of Tekoa said to the king, Oh, my lord, the king, the iniquity is on me and my father's house, but the king and his throne are guiltless. So the king said, Whoever speaks to you, bring him to me, and he will not touch you anymore. Then he said, Please let the king remember the Lord your God, so that the avenger of blood will not continue to destroy. Otherwise they will destroy my son. And he said, As the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. So she talked him into it. David's response is essentially, Go home, I'll think about it. But she presses him, and she's persistent. He says, If you pardon my son, the guilt's going to be on me and my family. And so if David pardons her son, then he will answer to the clan, the tribe, the family. And so why has David pardoned her son, whom he's never met, because he didn't really exist? So she's saying the guilt won't be on David, she'll take it herself. And David says, if somebody messes with you, you let me know. They'll answer to the king. But she continues again to be persistent. It's not enough. If you don't do something, they're going to kill my son. Finally, David gives her what she's asking for. If anyone touches your son, they'll answer to the king. And then once again, man, you want to get to the king? Tell him a good story. Next verse says this, Then the woman said, Please let your maidservant speak. Speak a word to the Lord my king. And he said, Speak. The woman said, Why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in speaking this word, the king is the one who is guilty, in that the king does not bring back his banished one. For we will surely die. We're like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Yet God does not take away life, but plans ways so that the banished one will not be cast out from him. Now the reason I have come to speak this word to my lord the king is that the people have made me afraid. And so your maidservant said, Let me now speak to the king. Perhaps the king will perform the request of his maidservant. For the king will hear and deliver his maidservant from the hand of the man who would destroy both me and my son from the inheritance of God. Then your maidservant said, Please let the word of my lord the king be comforting. For as the angel of God, so is the Lord the king to discern good and evil. And may the Lord your God be with you. So she butters them up at the end a little bit. You pick up on that? This is so awkward, a transition from this fictitious story to somehow confronting the king. When Nathan, God's prophet, confronted the king, he used 2 words in Hebrew, right? 4 words in English. Do you remember? You are the man, right? Kids would say 3 words, you the man. So this is a little more clumsy. She's on thin ice. She's trying to frame permission to accuse the king of something. Not something you did back in the day. Certainly not in the ancient world. But this woman is an actress sent by Joab. She's on thin ice. One mistake, she's dead. So she makes this transition. David, you really are the guy because you're doing this to us, and it really makes me nervous. So please, you're like an angel of God. You're pretty awesome, and God be with you as you deal with me now. That's really what she's saying. But the bottom line, the punchline of the story is the people, God's people that you're the king over are hanging on by a thread. If you don't do something, something bad is going to happen. But David hasn't been doing anything because he thinks he's on the C team, if on a team at all. David's still the king. Thousands of people's lives are at stake. She describes it as water falling on the ground. If this water's been spilled, you can't put it back in the container, right? If you don't do something quickly, bad stuff is going to happen. People are afraid. They want you to do something. They're waiting. And so there's flattery, and I think that's pretty great. The king says this, verse 18. I could have just had her killed, fairness to David. Then the king answered and said to the woman, please do not hide anything from me that I'm about to ask you. And the woman said, let my lord the king speak. So the king said, is the hand of Joab with you in all this? And the woman replied, as your soul lives, my lord the king, no one can turn to the right or to the left from anything that my lord the king has spoken. In other words, yeah, you got me. Indeed, it was your servant Joab who commanded me, and it was he who put all these words in my mouth, or in the mouth of your maidservant. In order to change the appearance of things, your servant Joab has done this thing. But my Lord is wise, like the wisdom of the angel of God. You know all that is in the earth. Ends with flattery again, probably a good move at this point. This isn't David's first rodeo, right? He figures it out. This smells a lot like Joab. Is Joab behind this? And she responds, yep, you know, nothing gets past you, king. He figured it out. But he is your faithful servant, she describes him as. He's just trying to help you think this through and make a decision, because your wisdom is like the angel of God. We're sure you're going to make the right decision. So they have successfully backed David into a corner. And he has clearly publicly stated that he would be willing to pardon this woman's son, who did exactly what his son did. And if David's willing to do that for someone he's never met, why won't he do it for his own kid? Verse 21, then the king said to Joab, behold, now I will surely do this thing. Go therefore, bring back the young man Absalom. Joab fell on his face. Good move, Joab. Joab fell on his face to the ground, prostrated himself, and blessed the king. Then Joab said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, O my lord the king, in that the king has performed the request of his servant. So Joab arose, went to Geshur, and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. However, the king said, let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. So Absalom turned to his own house and did not see the king's face. Ending in verse 24. David, backed into a corner, allows Joab to bring Absalom back. Joab's really pretty happy that he doesn't get killed either. Says, oh, Lord, my king, you're pretty great, and thanks for doing what I wanted you to do all along. It's been 3 years since Absalom killed Amnon and ran away. 3 years so far. He hasn't seen his son, and he still doesn't want to see him face to face. Absalom goes directly to his house. He's not allowed to see the king's face. Jerusalem at this time is not very large. Everybody knows, right? On the wedding day, the bride is kind of shielded from the groom, and the groom can't see the bride when she's in her dress or whatever. And this is that. This is that. It would have been shameful. It's evident to everyone. It would have been embarrassing for Absalom. He's back, but he's grounded, right? Rather than David making a true decision, if he's guilty, kill him. If he's going to be pardoned, reconcile. David chooses the path of no decision and leaves the kingdom hanging in the balance. And so then the narrator of this biblical piece that God has left for us to learn from and apply to our lives in different ways takes a turn. Verse 25. Now in all Israel there was no one as handsome as Absalom, so highly praised from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. There was no defect in him. When he cut the hair of his head, and it was on the end of every year that he cut it, it was heavy on him, so he cut it. He weighed the hair on his head at 200 shekels by the king's weight. To Absalom there were born 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of beautiful appearance. That is a loaded paragraph. First of all, I can't stand Absalom. He's got so much hair. His body's near perfect head to toe. I'm not a fan of him at all. We find out that he's more handsome than anyone else. Let me see, who would that be today? Just kidding. So about the time we're wondering what's really going to happen, we talk about how good looking Absalom is. Tall, dark, handsome, lots of hair, lots and lots of hair. He cuts it once a year. And then weighs it. He would do well in the selfie generation, wouldn't he? Post on Facebook. But we're left with a question. It is so unusual in a Hebrew narrative, our Bible, that the narrator goes into this physical description of a guy who's not even the main player in this story. God's always the star of the story, but the main player here is still David and his leadership failures because he thinks he's on the B team or C team. Why is it necessary to find out how good looking Absalom is? Or that he cuts his hair and it's so much that it's making his head go back. Where's Dax? He's got this long hair. He cuts it once a year, and it weighs something. That's really unusual. And oh, by the way, he's got 3 kids, and one of them's named Tamar, who he took in once his brother did unspeakable things to her. And oh, by the way, she's beautiful. When's the last time we heard some girl was beautiful? If you don't go Tamar, you got to go all the way back to Bathsheba, which was the hinge point of David's failure. That's what's going on here. Amnon is the oldest son. He's dead now, but he was the crown prince, the successor of the king. But he's presented as a spoiled brat, just a spoiled brat. Whiny, weak, narcissistic, son of the king. You get the idea that no one liked him too much, and so when Absalom killed him for what he did to Tamar, his sister, they thought he did the king a favor. But Absalom is not like Amnon. Absalom's tall, dark, and handsome. He's externally the whole package. He's got it all going on. He's a fitting successor to the king. So when he is banished, apparently none of the other sons are as good looking or as healthy or whatever, or has as much hair as Absalom. So they fear the kingdom is in jeopardy. He's the one who should take over the kingdom, the people think. David needs to get him home, reconcile. He needs to be the next king. He was winning the hearts of the people. We get into even more of that next week. It raises an interesting question. When was the last time someone was described as tall, dark, and handsome who might be king? Saul. What's the biggest comparison in the book of Samuel? David and Saul. Good, even on his bad days, compared to Saul, who was tall, dark, and handsome. It's just interesting. And this is at a time when the people want a human king to fight their battles. Saul fit that description, although he was lousy. A teenager came in and beat up their biggest enemy, a dude named Goliath, right? So now the people want tall, dark, and handsome again. Why? Why do they want to relive Saul? Because the people that are voting age have never experienced life under Saul. Things have been so good under King David and his faith in God that they've only known prosperity, peace, and that Hebrew word shalom, right? This whole generation knows nothing but safety and security because of David and his faith in God. And he has this amazing empire. So it seems like they're poised to make the same mistake their great-grandparents made. Verse 28. Now Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem and did not see the king's face. Total of 5 years so far. 3 years away, 2 years close and can't see the king. Then Absalom sent for Joab and to send him to the king, but he would not come to him. So he went again a second time, but he would not come. Therefore, Absalom, he said to his servants, see, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. So Absalom's servant set the field on fire. Joab arose, came to Absalom in his house and said, "Why have your servants set my field on fire?" Absalom answered Joab, "Behold, I sent for you, saying, 'Come here, that I may send you to the king to say, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to still be there. Now therefore let me see the king's face, and if there is iniquity in me, let him put me to death.' So when Joab came to the king and told him, he's called for Absalom. So he came to the king, prostrated himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom." 2 years, he's a stone's throw away from Absalom. Not seeing the king's face, his dad. 5 full years, David has done nothing. Living out the C team, right? Absalom wants Joab to talk to him. This is like the junior high girls figuring out who they're going to take to the dance. You go find out. And then it's just a mess. Don't do it. Don't do it. None of you second rowers. None of you do it. You go talk to my dad. Joab wouldn't come, asked for him a couple times. Said, burn his field out. That'll bring him here. Even in that culture, although Joab was quite well off, he's ticked. He goes, "Why'd you burn my field?" "Because you wouldn't come talk to me." This guy is a prince, right? So go to the king, say, "Kill me or reconcile. Let's get this over with. If I'm going to be ignored by you, I'm going to go back to Geshur, right? Let's get on with this." So this is the first real glimpse. I mean, some of us know the biblical record pretty well, so we know where this is going. But for those of us who don't, this is our first real glimpse into the heart of Absalom. David was famous for having a heart after God, right? A heart like mine. Absalom, not so much. He's clearly not broken over the field, over his brother, over his sister, utilizing her horrible circumstance for his own gain. He's not repentant. He has no sense of what he's done to break the heart of his father, threaten the kingdom. Actually, it's just the opposite. He's a bit of a thug. You didn't talk to me? Fine, I'll burn down your field. He's defiant, rebellious, unwilling to admit that he's done anything wrong, right? So he's calling the king out. "Kill me or let's get on with it." And that's Absalom's heart. The text says at the end that the father kissed his son and welcomed him back. This is not the father of the prodigal son we see in the New Testament, where he ran to him and embraced him so much that the older brother got ticked, right? This is not that. It's very formal. He kissed Absalom, and you get the very strong sense that this story is far from over. And oh, would you be right? How much anger and resentment has built up in Absalom, or David for that matter, as he's been, Absalom, humiliated for 2 years in Jerusalem. We find out next week. But there's something to think about before we launch into the rest of our day. There's a question of the day. What happened to David? What happened to the David that we loved? The little shepherd boy that was taking care of dad's sheep, right? When the prophet comes in and anoints him or appoints him the next king, and he's got to wait forever, 15 years or so, to be anointed and appointed king before he takes the throne. He's in the wilderness, and even before that, as a teenager in the second row, he takes his slingshot and whips a guy named Goliath because Goliath spoke negatively about the name of God. He was a man of courage, a warrior who had the faith to trust God against unbelievable odds, even post-Goliath. He did unimaginable things for God's name and for God's glory. Where's that David? Because that dude's long gone. A man after God's own heart? Yeah, I guess. But now, he blew it. And he's living like God doesn't want him on the team anymore. He seems paralyzed, unwilling or unable to act. I won't rehearse all the negative things that were a result of that. But it's just what happens when we blow it, right? we make a mess of things, and we have all these regrets and consequences as a result of our poor decisions. And we just kind of roll over and quit. We no longer have that sense of mission and purpose like I talked about. You know, our T-shirt says, "Loser Christian." We don't wear it, but we wear it every day. And we may coast across the finish line because God is so good and gracious, and it's not our effort that brings us salvation, it's His on the cross and after. But we put ourselves on the B team. We put ourselves on the C team. God doesn't do that. God has a long history of using messed up leaders to do amazing things. I'm only going to give you one because of our time today. Do you remember our old buddy from the Hall of Faith fame, Peter? Peter didn't do anything for God, really, until the biggest mistake of his life. And he made it 3 times. Huge failure. I can only imagine the devastation when the Apostle Peter, after being predicted that I'll die for you, and Jesus says, "No, you're going to, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times." He follows at a distance. Christ is on the cross. His life has not been taken. He's not given his life up for us yet. Peter denies him 3 times, and the 3rd time he hears the rooster crow, and the Luke version of that says, and Christ gazed at Peter as he did it. Do you have a moment in your life that you can't forget the look on someone's face? I'll bet Peter remembers that day. The Gospels tell us that Peter denied him 3 times, and I think even after he's restored, till Peter went to his grave, he remembered the look that Jesus gave him. So he's assuming that, he was really happy when Christ arose. That was a good day for Peter. But he knew he was off the team. One of the ways we know that is because he went back to his other job, fishing. So Jesus is cooking him breakfast, much like our hospitality team has made us lunch, and calls him off the water, says, "Hey, Pete, I want to talk a little bit." And for the 3 times Peter denied him, Christ restores him. We've got some work to do, Peter, and I want you on the team. And Peter gets a recall. No longer on the C team. He wants him to wear the orange T-shirt. And in Acts 2, Peter speaks. And his first sermon, 3,000 people come to Christ. Now, we've had good days here. We haven't had that good a day. Jesus wanted him. Jesus wants us. Get it? Well, I hope so. If you get nothing else today, and we're going to observe communion, we're going to have another worship song and all of those kinds of things. But maybe today is your recall. Are you living your Christian life like you're on the B team? If you do, that's your choice, not God's. He wants us off the bench, back in the game. God redeems and restores. And I think the picture in 2 Samuel here is that David needs to get back on the A team, which he does eventually. It's still a couple weeks away, but we'll get there. We'll get there. I want you to hear God's recall today and contemplate being on God's A team. If we can help you with that, after the communion and the service closes, there'll be people up here by the cross to pray with you, to pray for you. It's time to be world changers again, right? And that doesn't mean we're against anything or anyone. It means God is for us, and we want to tell people that God is for them as well. Odd announcement. That's a weird transition. It's not quite the Woman of Tekoa transition, but it's not great. Pulse worship team sings in a couple weeks. And so I want to have a 4 to 6 minute meeting right in the second row when the service is over. And we'll hand out music and do some things like that. Make sure you visit the people who it's their last Sunday and those kinds of things. And please, whether you remembered to bring food or not, we've got a picnic in the park to go to. I'm going to have Pastor Ben come up and lead us in communion, and I'm going to have the worship team come up and take care of that as well. Thank you.